If you got up early on Sunday morning, a nice Sunday morning in Seattle, or moved your plans around at all to watch this game, I'm sorry. I mean, look, I love this team. I really do. And I feel like the fact that I've done one of these videos for every Kraken game ever, the inaugural season and this one included, is a testament to that. But yeah, there's some games that I couldn't blame people for missing, and this is certainly one of them. What's cracking, everybody, and welcome back to Kraken R&R, where the Seattle Kraken lose their second straight day game in as many days on a nice weekend where they did have a decent amount of travel between games. This one, 4-1 to the St. Louis Blues. And that travel between games and also the weird times of each of these games, I do think played a role, especially in this loss, as the third period really falls apart for the Kraken. And I also think there's some amount of this team that just kind of has given up at this point. You can tell that there's definitely, at the very least, some frustration with the lack of scoring that has once again plagued this team over the last few games. And I think that frustration mixed with the fact that, well, I know there's a number of these guys that at this point, given that they're not going to the playoffs, might rather be playing golf, or certainly would enjoy playing golf on a nice weekend instead of playing a meaningless game, especially when it goes like this. Okay, maybe that's not entirely true. I'm sure they're all trying as hard as they can, and they do love playing hockey. There's no way you'd play as much of it as you have to be as good as they are at it if you don't love it more than anything else in the world, other than maybe your families. But still, with the Masters going on, I'm sure it was at least in the back of their mind that they could be spending their Sunday morning out on the tees rather than, yeah, doing whatever that was. And heck, for what it's worth, in hindsight, I also probably would have rather been golfing, and I don't even golf more than maybe once or twice a year. I suppose I do disc golf. Disc golfing is pretty fun, so I probably would have rather been doing that on a nice Sunday than, yeah, watching this game where, with no changes in the lineup other than Decord and net instead of Grubauer as we get into the game, again, the Kraken really did play the first two periods of this game pretty well. They, I wouldn't really say controlled the first period for the most part, but they did start to build some momentum towards the back half of it, and eventually that momentum leads to them opening up the scoring in this game, as McCann makes a beautiful play in the Kraken end of the ice, stealing the puck off the stick of a Blues defenseman at the Kraken blue line, then taking it along the boards in front of the benches, down the far side on a bit of a partial break as the defenseman is able to, I wouldn't say catch up to him, but at least stay in stride. So McCann eventually fires off the shot from the inside of the faceoff circle on that side, and with the absolute laser of a wrist shot that he has, he finds the plumbing, which after last game might have had a little bit of a split second of some, I don't want to call it PTSD, but I'm sure there was a split second where he wasn't positive it went in, but it does go in. He gets his 29th of the season, and the Kraken, with the unassisted goal from McCann, take the 1-0 lead. And not only that, but they're able to maintain momentum into the late parts of the first period, but eventually, against the flow of play a few minutes later, with just over a minute left in the first, the Blues get a partial break of their own. Not quite as much of a break as McCann had. There is a defenseman much closer to this play, so it forces the shot to come from farther out. It's not nearly as hard of a shot as McCann has, but it manages to squeak through the armpit of Decord and bounce or trickle its way into the net behind him to even things up. Kraken do end up getting a power play, actually a double minor to finish off the first as Larson gets hit in the face, but they don't get anything out of that, not only to end the first period, but also with the almost 3 minutes of power play that start out the second. And while they are still able to get at least slightly, I would say, the better of the Blues through the first half of the second period, it doesn't amount to much of anything, and honestly, the second period for the most part was a bit of a dull one to watch. There wasn't much of anything going on, not a ton of high danger scoring chances other than one that did end up getting through to Cord but doesn't go in the net, and really should have ended up in the net. The Blues player who has it on his stick could have easily just carried the puck a little bit further and then had an empty net to shoot at as Decord sprawls out to try and make the save. It goes under his armpit and off of the post behind him into his back and then safely out to the other side. Again, the net's basically empty if the guy just keeps the puck on his stick a little bit longer. He had Decord beat with the move that he made. So the Kraken dodge a bit of a bullet there, but as we get into the last few minutes of the second period, this is where the wheels start to come off. The gas is clearly out of the tank, and to be fair, it's somewhat understandable. This is their second game in 22 hours, just 22 hours between start times of the game in Dallas and this one in St. Louis, plus the travel time and the fact that these are both day games, which certainly is not the norm for the typical routine that hockey players like to go through before games. Typically, you have a morning skate, and then they'll like to go back, and a lot of them will take naps or something like that to re-energize the body and get ready for that game, but that's all not possible with a day game, so all of that's thrown out the window. You're off your schedule, and then you have the travel of around 600 miles between Dallas and St. Louis. So yeah, eventually, especially with it also being the 80th game of the season and you're not going to the playoffs, all that to say, I think it's somewhat understandable that they weren't necessarily at their best, even if they were still trying the hardest that they could through the last few minutes of the second period where the Blues still don't score, and then into the third where they do a couple of times. And unfortunately, with the game tied going into the third period, the first one comes less than a minute in. Just a second under a minute, but still technically less than a minute into the third period. The Blues take the 2-1 lead. It comes off of a shot from way up in the corner by the blue line that Decord is able to make the relatively easy save on. He can see it coming most of the way. Still, the rebound bounces out to a wide open Kyrou, who's gotten himself lost in a bit of a haphazard, scattered defensive setup by the Kraken. So with that rebound going right to him, and he's got all the time in the world that he needs, he just takes it and puts it right past Decord into the net without much of anything Decord can do about it. I mean, by the time the puck bounces out to him and he has it on his stick, yeah, Decord doesn't have a chance to get back to try and make that save or even try to dive in front of it. So the Blues take the 2-1 lead, and the Kraken just never really had the gas in the tank to try to come back. I mean, I guess the Kraken do press a little bit over the next couple minutes after this lead-taking goal for the Blues goes in, but it doesn't result in anything dangerous. If anything, it's just more slowing down the Blues' momentum, which eventually starts to build towards the middle of the period, is shut down a little bit as they send the Kraken to a power play. The Kraken don't get anything to happen on that power play. They get a little bit of momentum out of it, coming out of it at 5-on-5, still, again, unable to score. The Blues eventually turn that back towards the Kraken end of the ice, where they get a power play late in the third with the lead, aren't able to score, but out of the power play, they get a rush chance down the other way. It's a partial break, and this time, much more of a partial break, kind of like the McCann one. Schultz actually is far enough behind the guy that has the puck that he ends up having to commit a penalty to prevent a particularly dangerous shot from getting off. Still, he's able to get one off. And then with the ref's arm up in the air to call that penalty, the puck bounces right back to him. He takes a second shot off, which just glances off the top of the pad of Decord, who's sprawled out having made the first save, bounces off of his pad, and trickles into the net behind him to give the Blues the 3-1 lead. The Kraken do eventually go empty net, but aren't able to get anything to happen really out of that. The Blues find the empty net eventually to make it 4-1, and you have our final score. So for the Kraken, it's their third straight game now of only scoring one goal and letting up 3 the other way, plus this time the empty netter is tacked on at the end. And yeah, it's not likely to get much better in their next game on Tuesday as they go to play a Winnipeg Jets team that is the best in the NHL at keeping the puck out of their net, or at least their goaltender in Hellebuck is very likely to win the Vezina, and they still do have something to play for with a win over the Kraken. They can lock up home ice advantage against Colorado in the first round, which they'll definitely want to do given how Colorado's played at home this season, although Colorado's a bit cold as of late, but that's a different issue. The point is the Jets are not likely to go easy on the Kraken, which is going to make scoring much more difficult. Not that the Kraken weren't able to score on the Jets anyway the last time they were in Winnipeg, but yeah, it's not a game that I would expect to be a high-scoring one, at least on the Seattle end of the ice. I suppose at least they finished the year in Minnesota against the Wild, so, I mean, the Wild don't really have much to play for. Maybe they can get a couple of goals there. Either way, yeah, it's been a tough stretch, and it's not likely to get much better over these last 2 games of the season. And I mean, really, with the Kraken at this point, to be perfectly honest, and saying this might not help the viewership of the last couple R&Rs of the season, but there really isn't a ton else to look for from this team over the last couple of games. Now with the younger guys back in Coachella Valley, or I guess looking for McCann to score one more goal to get that nice even 30 mark on the season, and Beniers to finish his year strong so that he can hopefully start next year on a bit of a higher note than this year started. Other than that, we're just watching these last couple of games for the love of watching the Kraken and hockey before they disappear until this coming October, but disappear for a few more months. Obviously, we'll still have the playoffs to watch, but yeah, the Kraken won't be a part of it. Well, I suppose there's also the draft order thing, which, as far as that's concerned, the silver lining to these last few games not going great is that if the Kraken do lose the last 2 games that they have left to play, then they'll clinch at least the 8th spot in the draft, or the draft lottery anyway, and they still have a chance to potentially jump two more teams in Ottawa and Arizona. If Ottawa can win both of their games or win and then lose in overtime, if they can get 3 more points, and if Arizona wins both of their last two and the Kraken lose the last two, then they stand to, I mean, it's a long shot, but at best jump up to the 6th spot in that draft lottery, which gets them somewhere around a 6-7% chance at the first overall pick. Other than that, there's, I guess, also Eberle could score his 300th goal in his career if he scores one more, so maybe that's one last fun thing that we could see in these last couple games. Okay, so I guess there's still a couple of things left to watch for other than just watching the last couple of Kraken games for the love of watching the Kraken, which, if you're still watching Kraken games and watching this video to this point, I'd have to imagine you do love watching the Kraken enough to watch these last two games regardless of what happens before we're stuck with the Mariners until October. And maybe it's a little unfair to say stuck with the Mariners. I love the Mariners as well. They're my first sports love, but yeah, that's not gotten off to a very good start at all. So, yeah. Still plenty of games to turn it around. It's a long season with baseball, but woof. But to close things out on this game, we'll finish out with the Kraken 3 stars, as always brought to you by patrons over on Patreon. If you want to help decide the 3 stars for the last 2 games, I guess, but also if you want to help decide the Kraken awards for the channel here at the end of the season, that video will be coming out sometime next week once the season is fully wrapped up, and I have a chance to pick some finalists and put polls out on Patreon for you guys to decide who gets those awards. Yeah, you can do that by joining through the link down on Patreon, the link down below to Patreon, and helping support a little bit more than you already are. Anyway, with the 3 stars in this game, the first one is Jared McCann. He has that great play, pretty much a full, well, not 200-foot play. He takes it to the blue line, so that cuts off, what would that be, somewhere around 50, 40 feet. Anyway, he does it mostly himself, stealing the puck and then taking it in to score, getting his 29th of the season and making that 30-goal season still possible for him at this point. Other than that, Riker Evans had a pretty good game, and that's another thing to watch for, is how Riker can continue to develop over these last couple games before he gets to go play more hockey, going down to play with the Firebirds for their playoff run. And, yeah. I don't know if there's a 3rd star for this game. It was definitely one where you could tell that they were tired, to say the very least. Well, let me know what you think down in the comment section below. Is there a 3rd star that you can think of? Or, yeah, would you maybe do less stars? I think McCann, again, probably deserving. Let me know what you thought of this game in general and how you're feeling with these last couple games into the season. If there's anything you're looking forward to in particular in these last couple games that I didn't mention, feel free to leave that comment down below. But until next time, with that one coming out on Tuesday, and then I'll have one last power rankings for the people that like those at the end of the full season going into the playoffs. Sometime over the weekend, I'll do that one. Until next time, though, stay safe out there, be good to each other, God bless, and go Kraken.